Hello, everyone, and welcome to Slash Film Daily. Today is Friday, May 17th, 2024. On today's episode of the show, we're going to be talking about The Strangers Chapter 1, and we're going to present an interview with the movie's director, Renny Harlin. My name is Ben Pearson. I'm an editor at slashfilm.com, and I'm joined on today's episode by Slash Film editor, Jacob Hall.
Hello, hello.
All right, Jacob. So, full disclosure, we're actually recording this a few days earlier than the movie actually coming out. So, I have not had a chance to see The Strangers Chapter 1 yet, but I'm curious what you make of this movie. Tell me about what you think about it.
I like The Strangers Chapter 1. I have issues with it that I think a lot of people may share. And I know that by this point, you can go on to slashfilm.com and read our review from a different critic who did not care for it. But when it works, which is, I think, frequently enough to be worth your time, it's a very spooky, very scary, very well constructed home invasion thriller. Uh, like I said, discuss what I think maybe where it has its weaker elements. It gets into spoiler territory. Maybe we can have a conversation later. But it is just a really sturdily made, just one of those. And it sounds like I'm being negative or like trying to be dismissive here, but I really don't mean that because I think that making a good horror movie that delivers the scares, gets in and out in under 90 minutes. There's real talent involved in just making these damn things work in any way whatsoever. And that's kind of why I want to speak to Renny Harlin. Ben, are you a Renny Harlin fan?
My Renny Harlin experience, I was going back and looking at his filmography, which is really wild, by the way. I think my biggest Renny Harlin movies are Die Hard 2, Cliffhanger, Deep Blue Sea, and Mind Hunters from 2004. Those are kind of like my pillars of Renny Harlin movies. I've checked in on some other ones here and there, but those are the ones that I actually enjoy.
Yeah, Renny Harlin, his filmography is chaos. And that's why I want to talk to him, because it's one thing to go talk to somebody who's, an Oscar-winning legend where they have this, reputation to protect, and they have and they've built themselves up to, very much by design to look a certain way and to be seen a certain way. But you have directors like Renny Harlin who've been making movies constantly, steadily for 40 years. The man's in his mid-60s. He's directed so many movies. He's directed low-budget horror films. He's directed major sequels, major action movies. He's directed some of the biggest box office bombs of all time. He's directed hits. He's worked in the Chinese film industry. He's worked in the European film industry. He's worked all over Hollywood. He's made direct-to-video stuff. He's made modern theatrical stuff. He's been everywhere. And that's the kind of filmmaker who I'm interested in talking to, because that's the kind of filmmaker who has stories. And in our interview, you hear him admit that he's made some bad movies. He's not going to sit there and pretend like his Hercules movie in 2014 is good. He's not going to sit there and pretend that The Exorcist: The Beginning, the horror prequel that he entirely reshot, he's not going to sit there and say that was a great movie. In fact, his story about making that is kind of harrowing, because he clearly did not he did not sign up for that movie asked him to do. Ben, am I wrong for thinking that working filmmakers like Renny Harlin, who've made everything from Nightmare on Elm Street Part 4 to Cutthroat Island to Long Kiss Goodnight, they probably have better stories than a Spielberg?
Yeah, I think so because, when you're somebody like Steven Spielberg, you have gotten so much success that people give you, for the most part, people give you what you want and what you need for a project. And somebody like Renny Harlin has had so many ups and downs over the course of his career that he feels like he has to scrap to make his movies. He has to do whatever it takes here and there to get things done, and that inherently becomes more dramatic, and there's more opportunities for fun stories there. And he's also, because he's worked in so many different areas of the industry, he's worked with so many different types of actors. And you've got gigantic movie stars, you've got rappers, you've got people who've never acted before, you've got up and coming wrestlers, you've got or wrestler turned actors. I mean, there are just so many different types of people that he's worked with, and that also provides its own share of potentially dramatic stories. So yeah, I think you're right on that.
Yeah, so this is my way of saying that the opening round of this interview, I had 30 minutes with Renny Harlin, and you can kind of hear him in junket mode a little bit as we discuss Strangers Chapter 1. He's not giving bad answers. He gives very long, thoughtful answers to every question I ask, which is why I literally ran out of time before I can get to some of his really noteworthy movies. So if you're wondering why we didn't talk about Long Kiss Goodnight or Cutthroat Island or a movie I really like, Devil's Pass, a found footage horror film that I think is really underrated, that's why. It's purely a timing issue. The publicist had to kick me out so we could talk to somebody else. Yeah, you don't need if you want to hear some stories, you don't necessarily need to be a Strangers fan or even a horror fan to enjoy this interview. So that's my way of saying, like, if you're not interested in seeing Strangers Chapter 1, that's okay. Still listen to this interview because Renny Harlin has Bruce Willis stories, his Samuel L. Jackson stories. He, like I said, his stories about working on Nightmare on Elm Street Part 4 and Cliffhanger, a 90s film that I love. Uh, just lots of terrific stuff from a guy who I don't even want to call him like a B movie king because he made lots of major blockbusters in addition to B movies, but there's a genuine sense of every Renny Harlin movie has a B movie energy, a lovely, beautiful B movie energy, even when he has $100 million like he did in the '90s. So
Mhm.
I think that this is a fun interview. I'm really pleased with the conversation, and I think that if you like movies, you're going to like hearing Renny Harlin talk about them.
Yes, for sure. I also forgot The Long Kiss Goodnight when I was talking about my pillar Renny Harlin movies, and I'm embarrassed to say that. So, yeah, that's another one you can add to my list of things. So, yes, here is Jacob's conversation with Renny Harlin.
Mr. Harlan, how are you doing today?
I'm great, Jacob. How are you?
I'm doing great. I really enjoyed the film.
Thank you.
And watching it, I'm really interested in learning more about why you've become such the go-to guy for stepping into a series midway, or like you're not like for Nightmare on Elm Street, Die Hard, Strangers, Exorcist. You've become the go-to guy for stepping in when they need a refresh or a new director. Why do you think this is? Why do you think you've become somebody who's reliable in that way?
Ooh, God only knows. Uh, Nightmare on Elm Street 4 was a fantastic stepping stone for me in a sense that I was getting into a franchise, fourth movie in the series, and I was a young filmmaker, and I have lots of big ideas how to give the audience what I felt they wanted in that franchise, and how also to come up with some new ideas, and we took some risks actually, but it worked, and actually the movie was well received and was successful, and I think based on that the powers that be felt like I was reliable in that sense, that I'm not going to go crazy and start doing my crazy ego trip. I will definitely put my own uh, uh, handprints on it, but stay within the framework, which to me is crucial. Why do a sequel or some kind of a reboot of something that people loved if you're just going to do your own ego trip? Because you owe it to the audience. You have to be faithful to why did they love this particular movie. And in this case, we had the classic The Strangers from 16 years ago, that really is, for many, is one of the best horror films, and myself too, because it was so revolutionary in a way. It didn't give any nicely packaged answers. It just showed the senseless danger of terror and violence. And at this point of my life, I wouldn't have been interested in somebody saying like, let's just remake that movie, or let's do a sequel, a random sequel, and have the strangers go somewhere else, kill somebody else. But because we were doing this 4.5 hour epic and dividing that into 3 chapters, I felt like what a unique opportunity to dig deeper into the psyche of both the victims and the killers themselves, and not to give some neat answers, but to explore these things in much more epic way than you get to do in a normal movie. And I think that to really answer your question, I just think that I've been doing this for a while, and the studios find me reliable, and they know that I love what I do, and I wouldn't at this point. Like I said, I wouldn't just jump into some remake or sequel just because. But this was an opportunity I couldn't let go. I felt like it's such a fantastic opportunity to give audience what they loved, but to give them more.
And one thing that's interesting is that in the original Strangers series, the sequel actually is a big tonal jump. It goes from to a far more crowd-pleasing, still scary, but more of more of a party atmosphere, like a movie you want to cheer through instead of being scared through. Do you see yourself going like, will the sequels, chapters 2 and 3, see some tonal shifts as well, or are they going to be kind of true to what you do in the first film?
definitely true to it. And we plan after all the three chapters have come out, we plan to release the whole 4.5 hour Odyssey as one movie, and see who will last in the movie theater for 4.5 hours and go through that atmosphere of dread for that long. I think it's the key to this, and like I said, I feel like when I was doing something like a franchise like A Nightmare on Elm Street, we veered really in certain ways to new directions and introduced more humor into it and so on. But I think these movies, this franchise, the key is the sense of reality, and you can't start taking licenses and saying like it's a movie, so let's have a dancing number and let's have crazy paranormal things happen and let's make it into just a big cinematic party. I think that the key is that this particular movie, you have to stay true to the fact that this is brutal real life. This is one of those situations that could happen to any of us. And these brutal killers, these serial killers, there are those people, these sociopaths out there. And it's just, this happens. A violent crime happens, I think, like every 32 seconds in the United States. It's just bad luck, but it could happen to any one of us if we just happen to be at the wrong place at the wrong time.
There's a recurring trend across your filmography of movies that were successful at the time or weren't successful at the time, but are being reassessed and finding audiences years later. I remember a few years ago, I watched a repertory screening of your film Prison with like a really excited midnight audience, and people would have had a great time. The fact that people are seeing your films decades later and realizing this was actually really good, this holds up, this is awesome. Has that been something that you are aware of? Has it impacted how you make movies now?
Yes, it's been really awesome and flattering to, I've been to some screenings of big screenings of Prison, for example, which at a time when I made this, and this was in the 80s, before Nightmare on Elm Street, literally close to 40 years ago. When I made it, I had very high goals, and it was very low budget and all that, but very high goals of making a really good movie. And of course, then when the release didn't really work out and all that, it felt like a failure, and you've just felt like I poured my heart and soul into this, and what was I left with in the end? A videotape that a handful of people saw, and to have people rediscover the movie decades later and arrange these big fan screenings, and me getting a lot of feedback on that movie, and having new generations of people appreciate it. It really validates the effort, and it really makes you feel like, okay, I wasn't an idiot. It's just various factors, conspired against this film at the time, but it's been discovered, and like the honesty, and this might sound very lofty and like a bunch of bull to some people, but honestly, when I'm making a movie, any of my movies, and some of them are no masterpieces by any means, but I'm putting everything into it. My artistry, I look at it. I never look at it as this is just a bunch of entertainment. I look at it as an art form. I plan every shot, every angle, lighting, the costumes, the acting, the story to the best of my ability. Sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't. But to get validated later on and people rediscovering some movies, it is incredible, and it proves to me that it's worth doing it, and that's the only way how I can imagine doing this, which is that every time you take it incredibly seriously and you do your best, and then whether that magic happens with the audience at that moment or later or never, that's up to things that you can control. But it definitely makes you feel like it's worth doing over and over again.
You briefly talked about experience on Nightmare on Elm Street 4, and I guess I want to hear your thoughts on one of the ongoing horror debates. People still debate serious Freddy Krueger versus comedic Freddy Krueger. And I think part four walks this fine line where he's still scary, but also he's starting to introduce the sillier side, the funnier side that people also gravitated to. Do you remember on the set, like the conversation you had with the actors and your fellow filmmakers to try to balance those tones and try to introduce the comedic elements that define that film?
Absolutely. And I take big responsibility for steering Freddie in that direction on the fourth movie. And my thinking was that what I told the producers, I said, I felt like by now the audience was in on the joke. They got it. It's to sell the same idea again that Freddie is just this scary child molester. It wasn't believable anymore, and that we had to introduce something new. And also, clearly, Freddie had become the star of the movie. He wasn't just this scary, violent guy, but he was a bigger than life phenomenon. So the term I used when we started working on the movie and the script and the nightmares and everything, I said, I think we have to make Freddy the James Bond of horror. And so then everything we did, starting with his resurrection in the beginning of the movie and the low angle Steadicam shot pushing in on him and he puts his hat on and so on, it was really designed to make him the hero of these movies. And it's, still he's killing these young people and it's supposed to be scary, but we wanted to, find this new kind of a balance in the movies. And I think that still we were able to, with certain sequences, really to dig into like the angst of teenagers and, whether it's like, being at school or these kind of sexual fantasies, like the kid with the naked girl inside the waterbed, and this kind of like getting punished for sins that you do. It was still relatable, and that was the whole idea of the main character, Alice, also, that her arc is that she turns from this mousy girl into this hero. So I think that, to a certain extent, I feel like we were able to combine this kind of a little bit of a superhero tale with some comedy, such as the faces of the victims on a pizza, which is of course like outlandish, but it just, luckily to us, it created a balance where the audience was allowed to laugh and kind of have a good time, and then also be kind of horrified by the realization of all the scary murders.
Well, I briefly want to talk about a movie that you famously did not make. You were going to make Alien 3, and you've discussed in interviews before about how you clashed the studio over your vision. Now, one of the deal breakers of the studio was that they didn't want it to set on Earth. They think that it wouldn't make sense on Earth. And now they're making an Alien TV show that's going to be set on Earth. And I'm wondering if all these years later, you're shaking your fists and feeling vindicated that you had a good idea 30 years ago and they didn't listen to you.
I always thought that I had a good idea, and you have to remember when you put it into perspective, is like I was working on Alien 3 in '89, which was before Jurassic Park and all those movies. So the concept of having these creatures on Earth for the studio, it felt scary and unattainable. For me, it was the natural evolution. We've had the alien with the truck drivers in space. We've had aliens with the Marines in space. And where do we go next? Let's bring the aliens on Earth and have them going through the cornfield. I had the poster already in my mind with the farmhouse and the cornfield in moonlight, and they are going through the cornfield. And to this day, I think it would have been a ginormous hit movie. Because it would have been the first time anything like that was done. But for whatever reason, studios felt like, the audience won't buy that, so let's put the aliens on a prison ship. Prison ship? How am I going to relate to a prison ship? But that's ancient history. I'm not blaming anybody. But yeah. But for those who don't know, I worked for a year on Alien 3, and I quit politely, respectfully, because I couldn't stand the idea of, after Ridley Scott and Jim Cameron coming up with a movie that is just not going to live up to, again, live up to what the audience is expecting and give them that experience. The key to me, just to say it again about the Alien movies, was that they have to be relatable. They might be in outer space, but the characters are you and I in outer space, and that's what makes them tick. And that's I believe what makes The Strangers tick. It's you and me in that house.
Well, another one of your sequels that did get made, Die Hard 2. I feel like every director I hear talk about Bruce Willis describes a different person. I can never get a handle on what it's like to work with Bruce Willis because everybody seems to have different stories. What are your memories of working with Bruce Willis in that film? Like, what was your collaboration like?
Honesty is the best policy. It wasn't an easy movie to make. Bruce, after many, many years of moonlighting, light TV comedy, romantic comedy, had become a movie star because he did Die Hard. And now he was determined to make his mark as a serious movie actor. So his first sentence to me was that I don't want to do any of that stupid, jokey bullshit. I wanna make the characters completely serious and real and so on and so forth. And I was horrified. And I said to him, I know, I understand where you're coming from, but this movie is called Die Hard. And what the audience, I guarantee to you what they loved about it was your character, who's a blue-collar cop with marital problems, which eventually he overcomes. And the love for his wife is the most important thing for him. And his hatred for authority and his sarcastic way of looking at the world around him, cracking some jokes. That was the beating heart of Die Hard. And we had to, of course we were expanding the story and the environment and making the movie bigger, but we had to be truthful to that character. And that was our big disagreement throughout the whole making of the movie. And I got our producer, Joel Silver, to become a referee in this situation, and we agreed finally that we will shoot the movie so that we would shoot as many takes the way Bruce liked his character to act, and then in the end always one take of each scene where he does it the way I think he should do it, and with the lines that I think he should say and the reactions he should do. And that's how we shot the movie. But it wasn't we weren't arguing, but there was always this atmosphere of him kind of being reluctant and kind of making fun of me because it was always like, okay, let's do the Renny Harlin take. But we were friends. Bruce came to Finland, where I'm from, and everything. So I have great respect for him. He worked hard, but it wasn't the easiest experience. When I showed the movie to the 20th Century Fox Studios executives, they loved it, my cut. But their first question was, do you have any more of that funny stuff? Because it's so good. I said, I've saved every outtake. Even if the camera was rolling accidentally and Bruce smiled, it's in the movie. So that's it. I squeezed everything out of it. So, but it's just, what it really taught me is, it's particularly in action movies, but I think in all kinds of movies, levity is gold. Even if you have the most tragic, dramatic movie, to give the audience a chance sometimes to smile, let alone have a little chuckle or burst of laughter, it's really valuable because it's real life and people enjoy that.
One of my favorite performances in one of your films is John Lithgow in Cliffhanger, one of the most deranged, really over-the-top and fun movie villains of the 90s. What do you call about working with him to build that character? I'm curious how you the conversations you could have to make sure that character was on the track you both wanted him to be.
Excellent question. I have to preface that by telling you that, first of all, in action movies, or I guess in any kind of movies, your hero, your protagonist is only as strong as the antagonist. The bad guy, if the bad guy is a loser, then there's nothing heroic for the hero to do. And and I always look for something special, something to make not the bad guy, the mustache twirling guy who is just gonna blow up the whole universe with a nuclear weapon and loves doing it, but to find something special. So my dream cast to play the bad guy in Cliffhanger was David Bowie. And I pursued him hard. I remember going to New York to meet with him and talking about the movie endlessly. But then it was very close, but I think maybe he had a tour of something happened that the schedules didn't work out, so David Bowie didn't play the bad guy. My second choice was Brian Ferry, another legendary rocker. I went to England to meet with Brian. He came to LA to do a test shoot. Test shoot didn't go so well. He somehow, though I thought just in terms of his charisma and everything, he was perfect, but it didn't go so well, and we didn't end up casting him. And then we went in a different direction, which was John Lithgow, who was known for some comedy and drama and not really playing villains at all, but he was just physically imposing and acting-wise a brilliant actor. So I felt like, okay, here I can really find and create an interesting villain. And so I just, had a lot of talks with him, and it was a constant process throughout the shooting, and we had a lot of fun doing it, and a lot of his legendary lines were really, we came up with those lines on the spot, on the set, when he kills his girlfriend and all kinds of things like that, and he does something. We didn't want to have stupid quips and stupid one-liners, but still he had many opportunities to show his wit, and it was really thanks to John. But it was a constant kind of a checking back and forth that we are not going over the top, so he doesn't become like a character from Austin Powers. So I loved what he did.
There's one scene that every single person I spoke to said, make sure you ask him about it. The scene that everybody remembers, and a scene that you've talked about so many times, which is the shark death, Samuel L. Jackson's big final speech and death scene in Deep Blue Sea. I feel like that's gonna be your calling card scene. Everybody remembers it. Everybody talks about it. And the film turns 25 this year, and I feel like that's become the Renny Harlin scene. I think everything that's special about your filmography is summed up in that moment. So I'm wondering how you feel about so many people, movie fans, people like me, considering that scene to be the Renny Harlin scene.
I'm very happy and proud to hear that people think that the Samuel Jackson death in Deep Blue Sea is the crucial Renny Harlin scene, and I take credit for it, because the roots of that scene are in the fact that originally that character didn't exist in the Deep Blue Sea script at all. However, I had just done The Long Kiss Goodnight with Sam, and we became good friends, and we had sworn to work together always. So I was panicking because I didn't have any role to offer him, and then I talked to the producers and the writer and said, we got to invent something. And then I came up with the idea, which I completely stole from the first Alien movie, which was basically, in that movie there was nobody famous in it except Tom Skerritt, who played the captain of the ship. So he's the natural leader, and then when everything goes wrong and the alien starts invading the place and people start dying, he's like, don't worry, I'll take care of this. I'm just going to go into that air duct and take care of it, and you'll be all fine. And he goes to the air duct, and boom, the alien gets him immediately. And then we are left there wondering, who's the lead of this movie? And it turns out to be Sigourney Weaver. So I came up with this idea. I said, let's create this character who is this rich guy, who is an adventurer and mountaineer, and he's been everywhere. He's done everything. And he's going to be there, and because he's the most famous person in our movie, the audience is going to be misled to think that he's the hero and he's going to take us to safety, and they're going to rely on him. And then when we kill him, they're going to be in absolute shock. And then we created this speech for him, how he had climbed all the highest peaks in the world, and he was in this horrible storm, and people were dying, and then they did this, and they pulled together, and they survived. And he gives this speech. And it was really like a scientific process of us analyzing on the spot how long this speech can be, so that if it's too short, it doesn't lull the audience into certain sense of safety, and also certain sense of like, oh, this is the hero speech. I know exactly how these things go. Yeah, he's gonna talk, and then they're gonna go and save the day. So long enough, but not too long, so that the audience is just gonna start eating popcorn and go to the bathroom. So it just had to be just so that you can just develop a little bit of that movie attitude, which is like, I've seen this scene, but oh, what? And he gets attacked. So, and it just happened to work. And there was actually a big debate at the studio, Warner Brothers, whether that scene should be included in the trailer of the movie. And I said, no way. You know, that is the surprise of the movie. And if you give it away in the trailer, then there's nothing left. So we didn't. Yeah, that was just done because I wanted to have Sam in the movie.
One of your films that's definitely risen to like having a huge following now is Mindhunters, which is just one of the most entertaining films ever. And the line of dialogue that lives forever in my head from LL Cool J is, "I guess we figured out his weakness, bullets," which I laugh about every time I think about it. Do you remember directing LL Cool J for this line? Because I can't get it out of my head ever.
Really interesting that you bring up the Mindhunters, because it was another one of those movies where I felt like we had something special, and we really put a lot of work into that film, and it got a little bit sort of trampled in the aftermath of the studio Miramax that made it, and Dimension Films being sold to Disney, and this and that, and a lot of movies ended up in kind of a limbo, so it didn't really have a release, which was extremely frustrating. So it kind of reminded me of my early career experience with Prison. But I do get a lot of comments on that movie too from people who have seen it then in different circumstances, and I cast LL Cool J in it because we had worked together on Deep Blue Sea, and I thought that he did such a great job on Deep Blue Sea, and we enjoyed working together. We became good friends, and yeah, it was with his character, like any character. It was about finding a timing in those lines, because he does have that, his persona easily has that, a little bit of a laconic, little bit sarcastic attitude, and having him, you know, deliver those lines with exactly a certain pacing, you know, it was, sometimes we would try different things, you know. I guess we just found out its weakness, bullets, you know, what kind of a pause do you take there, and how do you say it, and all that. But I remember vividly us working on those scenes together.
Another franchise that you jumped into midstream, Exorcist: The Beginning, you know, famously one of the most interesting film shoots of all time, a sequel that was completely reshot. And I've always wondered, when you were asked to reshoot Exorcist: The Beginning, how much of Paul Schrader's film had you seen? Were you aware of it vividly? Did you see all of it, or did you intentionally not watch it? I'd love to hear about how you stepped in there.
Boy, that's a whole other podcast. But to make a long story short, it was an example to me of, you know, be careful what you promise to do, even if you feel loyalty to be careful with the degree of loyalty that you demonstrate. It was a case where the producer of the film was a good friend of mine, and they had problems with the film that was made, and they felt like it wasn't finished, and what was told to me was that the original director wasn't interested in working on it more, and they were kind of left in a limbo. And they said, could you look at this film, and we could just discuss if you could, you know, help us put it together, and maybe reshoot a couple of scenes, and do a little patchwork to make it cohesive. And I saw it, and I saw that it had problems, and out of loyalty to my friend, I said, I'll help you out. But, you know, I'm not going to take credit. I don't want anybody to know that I did anything, but I'll help you out. Long story short was, we shot one scene, and once we shot one scene, they said, could you shoot this other scene? And we shot the other scene, and he said, could we shoot this next scene, now that we've done these 4 scenes, well, maybe we could recast that character because now that character is only in other 2 scenes. And so if we reshoot those, then we can recast that character. And it just was a snowball that didn't stop rolling until we realized that we had reshot the whole movie. I never signed up to do the movie. I literally signed up to show up for 2 or 3 days and help patch up things a little bit. But I was trapped in that, and then I couldn't leave. I couldn't get out of it, and ended up just basically reshooting the whole movie. And I felt somehow really blindsided by the fact that then later they also released the other version, which was really weird and put me in a really weird position. I didn't want anybody to think that I was just kind of robbing another director's movie and redoing it and saying like I can do it better. It was done in very tough circumstances without a full script, without a full budget, just scene by scene, adding this, adding that. It was a really weird experience, but I did it out of loyalty. I don't regret it, but I will be careful next time if somebody asks me for a favor like that.
All right. Well, we're talking about time. I think it's very telling that I didn't get to talk about Long Kiss Goodnight or Cutthroat Island or 12 Rounds or Devil's Pass, all the movies that you've done so much. So hopefully I'll talk to you again in the future. We'll talk about the rest at a different time. Thank you so much. This was great. And I hope people go see Strangers Chapter 1. It's a really good time with the movies.
Thank you, Jacob. It's been great talking to you. You're really an expert. Thank you.
All right, Jacob, before we go, I have to ask you one more thing about The Strangers Chapter 1, since we didn't really talk about it too much at the beginning. What is your relationship to the Strangers franchise as a whole? I saw that first movie when it came out back in, I think it was 2008, and really enjoyed that, but I have not kept up with any of the other projects. What's your relationship like there?
I like the first Strangers. I think it's really well directed and really spooky. And I think that everybody's been spending the past 16 years trying to desperately rip it off in terms of its stylistic choices, and I think Strangers still does it best. With that said, the trashier, louder, synth-scored, neon-drenched sequel, Strangers Prey at Night, is the one I prefer.
Okay, all right, man, interesting. So, I never saw that one. I don't know if I ever really heard anybody say anything great about it, but just the idea of it having a synth score is enough to sort of get me tingling a little bit. So maybe I'll have to check that one out. Would you recommend it?
Yeah, Strangers Prey at Night is so much fun. Like the first Strangers is by default not fun. It's an intense, upsetting thing. Strangers Prey at Night is fun. It has a wild soundtrack, and it's goofy and it's crowd pleasing. And it really is. It's the Texas Chainsaw Massacre Part 2 to Texas Chainsaw Massacre's Part 1 in terms of leaning into being a completely different movie, because what else could you do after that first one?
Right. Okay, cool. Well, yeah, I'll definitely check that out. And yeah, I don't remember if Renny Harlin actually says it explicitly in the conversation that you have, but he's already filmed The Strangers Chapter 2 and 3. So those movies, I don't think they officially have release dates as of right now, but I suspect they'll be announced pretty soon, because I think the plan is to roll those out, sometime in the next year or two or something like that. So
yeah, and as he said in the interview, he plans to cut them all together into one 4.5 hour long movie at some point, which is a choice. I don't know how a 4.5 hour long home invasion film will play, but you know what, Renny Harlin, I followed you for this long. Go for it. Let's see what happens.
Excellent. All right. Well, you can find much more about The Strangers Chapter 1 at slashfilm.com. I will try to link to a couple things in the show notes as well. Slash Film Daily is published every weekday, bringing you the most exciting news from the world of movies and TV, as well as deeper dives into the great features you can find on the site. You can subscribe to the show on Apple, Overcast, Spotify, wherever you get your podcasts. You can send your feedback, questions, comments, concerns, and mailbag topics to us at bpearson@slashfilm.com. Make sure to leave your name and general geographic location in case we mention your email on the air. Don't forget to take a minute to rate and review the show on Apple Podcasts or Spotify. That really does help us out a lot. Tell your friends about the show any way you can. Thank you so much for listening.